listening to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher. Heads up, we just redesigned todaysmama.com. Head on over there and check it out. You'll find a new super clean design, faster page load times, and a fantastic mobile experience. Of course, you'll also find more episodes of the podcast to catch up on and other bits of earth-shattering content like those Jell-O salad recipes we keep talking about. Don't you dare leave that site without subscribing to our weekly email. It's full of so much goodness. So head on over to todaysmama.com and let us know what you think. Today we're talking to Shannan Martin, a fan favorite. Shannan came recommended to the show by Aaron, who you may have heard on your favorite past episodes. Aaron's been reading Shannan's book, The Ministry of Ordinary Places, and it's up next on my to-read list. Shannan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So excited. And I have to read a little bit more about you before we dive right in. So a little more about Shannan. She's the author of The Ministry of Ordinary Places, Waking Up to God's Goodness Around You, and Falling Free, Rescued from the Life I Always Wanted. Now, I love this line from her bio. She's a speaker and a writer who found her voice in the country and her story in the city. She and her jail chaplain husband, Corey, have 4 funny children who came to them across oceans and rivers, and they live as grateful neighbors in Goshen, Indiana. Now, Shannan, first, did I pronounce Goshen correctly?
You did. It's perfect.
I Googled it. I was unsure of myself. Now, tell me about Goshen, Indiana.
Yeah, it has my whole heart. We moved here 6 years ago now. So in a lot of ways, it feels like we're still new, but in probably more ways, we just feel like this is very much our home. It's a small city. It barely classifies as a city. And a lot of people even laugh when I refer to it as a city because it has a very small town feeling. We have a really vibrant downtown area, and it's just a really diverse and kind-hearted and generous, open community. And we just absolutely love it here.
Now, where did you grow up? Because it sounds like maybe you moved to Goshen from the country.
We did. Yeah. I actually grew up in Southern Ohio, so a little bit north of Dayton, Ohio. And then my husband and I met up here in Northern Indiana in college. And my husband was sort of from this area, but in a more rural part of the county. So we did live, out in the country, and what we believed at the time was just our dream farmhouse. It's where we thought we would stay forever, once we finally found that place. And so when we moved to Goshen, we didn't move far. It was maybe just 10 miles away, not far at all. But in a lot of ways, it was also, just a whole new world for us.
And what drove your decision to move from that big farmhouse in the country into the city?
Yeah, we had been just in our farmhouse for maybe, 3 years. And like I said, we really believed that was it for us. We thought we would stay forever. We really loved it. And I had this vision, this very idyllic motherhood vision of my kids just running around barefoot. We were on 6 acres and we had pastures and gardens and an orchard, and we had everything that we really thought we wanted. And we were really sort of just shocked when we started listening to a particular sermon series, which is funny to me because that's not something we had ever done before. Kind of like, let's get the kids to bed and listen to a sermon series. That's not who we were.
That's a hot night out right there.
Right, exactly. And it's still like, I laugh all the time, like, what in the world? I cannot believe we did that. But it was somebody really close to us and trusted by us who suggested that we listen to it. And so we did. And it was the sermon series that became the book Radical by David Platt. And it was just sort of a call to really the heart of the gospel, which is, love the poor, love the widow, love the orphan. And we found ourselves realizing that we weren't quite doing that. But an even bigger concern was we just really didn't know the poor. So that kind of started our journey into where we are now. And it was a long journey in some ways. None of this happened overnight, but we started to really become more intentional and serious about what does it really look like to do these things that for us are really foundational to our faith. And we started to believe that God was kind of calling us away from our farm. Not that there's anything wrong with living in a farmhouse or living out in the country. That's the way both of us had been raised. But
it sounds like heaven.
It was. But we started to understand that God had more for us and that his more for us was going to look like less. And so, it was just sort of a lot of walking in the dark for a while and kind of feeling around and trying to figure out the next thing. But where we had sort of built this life for ourselves and for our kids that was very much centered around the ideas of safety and security and peace, we just believed that we were kind of being called out of our comfort zone.
So I want to ask you before we get too far down that story. You mentioned you grew up in the country and you left the country for the city. So I need to know what your ratatouille is or was for growing up in the country.
This is very easy for me. For sure, it is the smell of wood smoke. So I grew up, out in the country in a very old, drafty, poorly heated farmhouse. Our only heat source through my entire childhood was a wood-burning stove. So there's still that thing in me that when I smell wood smoke or, being around a fire, that immediately takes me back. And my parents still live in the same home that I grew up in, and they still use that wood-burning stove. So that's the thing that right away takes me back. And then as far as, I'm a foodie. I love food. I love to eat food and I love to cook. Probably the taste of my childhood, like the biggest comfort food I can think of, is sort of a riff, I guess, on shepherd's pie that my mom used to make. We called it green bean casserole, but it's not what we think of now as green bean casserole, but that would be the smell and the taste.
Yeah, which is just comfort food, right?
Absolutely.
Like I know exactly the dish you're talking about.
Yes. Yeah, carby and warm and, the go-to can of tomato soup dumped in there. There's always got to be a can of soup dumped into every sort of casserole for it to count. So.
Yes. And like back in the day, that was like cream of mushroom or cream of chicken that made it into a lot of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Now compare and contrast, right? What is the ratatouille of your neighborhood in Goshen, Indiana?
Ooh.
Because, what you say about your childhood is that very country piece, right?
Right.
And so what would you say yours or even your kids' ratatouille for this new neighborhood and new place you live in is? How has that changed?
I think of this all the time. I'm forever kind of, like you said, comparing and contrasting what childhood meant to me and how it's going to look different in a lot of ways for my kids. I wrote about a lot of this in the Ministry of Ordinary Places because I became very interested in, what are the sights and the sounds and the smells of this community. And I'm very interested in, that descriptive language. But immediately, I would say the sound of the train. So we live just over a train track, and it's a very active and very loud train system. Many, many, many times a day. We're close enough that it's super loud. And so it took us a minute when we moved here. It took us a few minutes to be able to kind of sleep through it. And, at this point, I know that the sound of this train whistle is going to be the sound of childhood for my kids.
At first, it was probably a jarring sound to you, but has that transitioned to be a sound of comfort?
100%. I sort of have a love-hate relationship with the train because it keeps us in our neighborhood. It isolates us in some ways. And by we, I mean me and all of my neighbors. We feel a little tucked away over in this corner of the city. And so it can be hard to access the rest of town sometimes because we're sort of hemmed in by all of these railroad tracks. And so, it makes us late and it makes us frustrated sometimes, but that sound is home. It's home to me.
You've talked about your neighbors and how you love your neighbors and your neighborhood. And one of the concepts you speak publicly about quite a bit is radical hospitality. And it sounds like, part of your drive was to move away from what was comfortable and what you knew and get to know the things that you didn't know.
Right.
And you've said that means different people, right?
Right.
So I want to lead with one of your favorite quotes that you mentioned, because I have to think that this ties into your philosophy here. So this is from Mother Teresa, and it says, "The problem with the world is that we draw the circle of our family too small."
Yeah.
How might that tie to your definition of radical hospitality?
Well, for one thing, all 4 of our kids came to us through adoption. And our oldest is 24 and our youngest is 10. And so this adoption journey, while it was a huge surprise to us initially, we didn't imagine that our family would be built through adoption, but it's really all we know now. And it's just really, it's a gift that we are grateful for. And a lot of our life kind of deals with the ins and outs and the pain and the loss and the gift and the celebration of adoption. So I think now, now that we're sort of in this second phase of life is what it feels like in a lot of ways to me. I think of our life before we moved and I think of our life now. It's very different in many ways. But I think just being an adoptive family sort of nudged me into this idea that family can, and for us, it just does. It involves a lot more than DNA and, looking like the person that you are being raised by, looking like your parents or looking like your brothers and sisters. I think that made it a bit easier for me. But even once we came to the neighborhood, we still had this idea of, okay, but this is our family. And at the time we didn't have our oldest son, Robert, in our family. So it was just sort of like, this is the five of us. This is who we are. And I continually, and I still feel myself being nudged into embracing a wider view of family, because I think that's what it does mean to love the orphan or love the widow or love the lonely. And when we moved here, in a lot of ways, we were the lonely. And so it sort of necessitated this thing in us to go out and kind of search for other people who needed companionship and friendship and love, and to kind of cobble together this new definition, this new picture of what family really can be if we're willing to loosen our grip on what we think it's supposed to be.
And I think that's probably bled a little bit into how you handle your holidays, right?
Yeah.
Like you used a few phrases that I feel like you've used to refer to like how you do Christmas and Thanksgiving at your house. So what do those holidays look like at your house?
They look a little chaotic. They look not very precious and not very fancy and, not very Hallmark card. I remember growing up and my family lived with a pretty open door. We had people in and out quite a bit of my childhood home, but I remember also feeling this and it's something I remember feeling badly about, but I remember feeling like, there were certain days and certain times that needed to be reserved just for us. And I would feel a little bit of resentment even sometimes when that was disrupted, and it wasn't often, but my kids now, they were much smaller when we moved here. And we just have created a rhythm in our family where we have other people around us a whole lot. We have people, we're coming off of a weekend right now. We had company over Friday night and Saturday night. We like to say we keep the door easy on its hinges. So when people show up, they're welcome in. And my husband works as the chaplain of the county jail. So a lot of the people in our life are coming out of incarceration. Some of our absolute best friends are coming out of incarceration, rebuilding after the trauma of incarceration. We've really renegotiated, I guess, within ourselves, like who gets to be part of our family, who gets to be invited in. And it's really anyone. I mean, we've just really created an open door policy where really almost anyone is invited to sit around our table. And especially at the holidays, because that's such a time when, the lonely feel lonelier and the heartbroken feel the heartbreak even more profoundly. And so to create a space where people can come in and share a meal with us and really be grafted into our family around the holidays is a very special thing to us.
So it's funny because now I think it's more common for a lot of people, and there's like a comedy bit about this out there somewhere that I will find and I will put in the show notes about what happens when we hear a knock at the door. So at our house, when we hear a knock at the door, it is like an oh crap moment where we're like, who is here?
Right.
I gotta find my bra. I should probably shove some stuff in a corner.
Yes,
like everybody's
totally.
like, who could it be? But in a way that was exciting. And if we look back to the past, in past generations, when there was a knock at the door, it was like exciting and like somebody get the pie out of the fridge, or, they're like, who could it be? Come in and hang out. So the spirit of hospitality I feel declined a little bit.
Right.
What do you feel when you hear a knock at the door?
Well, I will be completely honest and say our oldest son is out of our house. He's on his own. But out of the five of us that are still here, 4 of us are introverts. So it does not necessarily come naturally for us to be like, oh, yay, somebody's here again. And we've had to learn, I especially have had to learn to to hold my privacy and my control and, all these things with a much more open hand, because it's just different when you go from living in a place where you're surrounded by soybean fields to living in a place where you have neighbors just really close to you on all sides. It is a more open, I guess, more connected environment. And so, I'm learning as I go in a lot of ways. I still have that feeling a lot of times of like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
We, for the most part, we know the people knocking on our door. They're people who we really do love. A lot of times we're just like screaming, like, come in, like we're busy doing our thing or cooking or reading or whatever. And just, the door's unlocked and come on in. But I think I've also learned that as we really experience this idea of kinship with the people near us, we're in a lot of ways, they really have become an extension of our family. It just makes it easier. And that's something that has just happened slowly over time. I reflect on this a lot because it has gotten easier for me in a lot of ways. And I think that's why. I think it's because, just the way we see our nuclear family, I guess. Not that our nuclear family are always like pleasant or enjoyable to be around, but they belong to us and we belong to them. And I think as a lot of our neighbors or the people close to us have crossed over into that territory, it's just a really much more relaxed thing. So people can come in and, they can hang out, they can come and go, and it doesn't feel like that pressure, like I've got to now entertain them or perform for them or whatever. I mean, yes, sometimes the broad, it has to come out, and that is kind of a sad moment. But beyond that, I think that as we all grow closer together, it just gets easier.
You're listening to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher. We'll be back right after this.
This episode is brought to you by Chatbooks, our favorite photo book company. But wait, they're more than a photo book company. Holiday cards are here. 20 cards for $20 plus free shipping. Seriously, go to chatbooks.com or download the app and get holiday cards off your to-do list.
And now back to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher.
So you mentioned a phrase earlier. You said nothing is precious.
Yeah.
And I want you to expand a little bit on that. But I also want to lead with the fact that I think one of the reasons that we all, as women, have such a love-hate relationship with Instagram, or maybe Pinterest in some instances, is because a lot of the things we tend to follow, well, and this is really dependent, I guess, on who you follow and what messages you want in your feed. But we're surrounded by a lot of preciousness, a lot of pictures of the perfect tablescape, right, or perfectly outfitted children, or the styled shot of the day from that fashion influencer, or whatever it is. And we've made so many things to be so precious, right?
Yeah.
So when you say nothing is precious, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, probably a whole list of things. I'll start with this. We realized, and a lot of this we've just learned through making mistakes and through getting things wrong. When we moved to the neighborhood and started, inviting more people into our home, we realized pretty quickly that a lot of our neighbors are not comfortable coming in and taking off their shoes. And this is something that's become very prevalent, I would say, especially in kind of middle class or upper middle class culture. You walk inside somebody's home and you take your shoes off because you don't want to track dirt into their home or whatever. And it's all very innocent and it's very just customary. But I will never forget the moment that I realized we never had big rules about that. But, it's also something I hadn't really thought about otherwise. But I remember a friend of ours who came in and she said, do I have to take off my shoes? And I remember detecting right away, she would have been embarrassed if the answer had been yes. And so, some of our neighbors don't have socks. Some of our neighbors might have socks that are dirty or have holes in them or whatever the case may be. There was a level of discomfort there. And so one of the things that we have tried to do is that when we have company over, one of us, we go and put our shoes on so that we're sending a clear message, whatever you're bringing into this home, we can handle it and it's welcome here. And it just kind of sets the tone. that, you're welcome just the way you are. So my ideas about, I'm a person who, like I said before, I love to cook. I really like to decorate. I love to have a home that's cute and cozy and all of those things. That's always been a part of me. But my ideas on, especially having company over or entertaining, I don't even like to use that word entertaining anymore, because it's very much less about how things look or what we are presenting or the food that's on the menu than it is about just there's room for you at the table. And so the house is a lot of times a lot more casual or unattended to or messy.
I like the word casual. Let's just call it casual. When we see my piles of laundry, it's just casual living. It's no big deal.
I mean, I would say most of the time when I have people over now, and sometimes they're just dropping by and sometimes they're invited, but I have dirty dishes in the sink. I mean, there are things that I try to do if I have a little bit of heads up. You don't want to be mortified by the condition of your bathroom and those kinds of things, but I just try to let that stuff go, because I know that it sets the bar at a more vulnerable place and at a place of, okay, I don't have to be fancy or special or really spruced up or tidy to come into this world, because this world isn't so spectacular either. It kind of sets the bar at a place of comfort.
That we can be human.
Exactly.
I've been thinking a lot about creating cozy spaces, but as winter comes, and I feel like this kind of folds into radical hospitality in a little bit of a way, because you've mentioned even little things like just conscious choices. Like you said, I will put shoes on. One person puts on shoes, right? But there's other little things that we can do around our home for our family or our guests that maybe make things feel really cozy, especially as we're coming up on like the dark winter, right?
Right.
So I kind of get bummed out about winter. And I was picking up a to-go lunch the other day, and the guy who was helping me was so chatty and charming and had a British accent. Like I could have listened to him all day long. It always helps, British accents. But he was talking about getting excited for snow. But then he also told me about an article he recently read on Hygge. Now, have you heard of this before?
Oh, yeah.
So I had not. So I'm like late to the party here. So you already know about it, but I'm going to read just a little bit for everybody. And this might be a little long, so you're going to have to put up with me. It's spelled like Hygge, like Hygge. And this is another thing I had to Google to see how to pronounce so that I did it appropriately today. But it's a Danish and Norwegian word for the mood of coziness and comfortable conviviality with feelings of wellness and contentment. The emphasis on hygge as part of Danish culture is like a recent thing. It's a 20th century development. And I also said another word. This is like Grammar Wednesday. Conviviality, which is a noun, which means the quality of being friendly and lively. So I actually think we touched on this in a past episode with Debbie Reber, who's currently living in the Netherlands. So if any of the listeners missed that one, go back. And here's the last bit I'm going to give you from something I read on the New Yorker. And then we're going to talk about what this looks like in our houses. And I'll put a link to this article to the New Yorker in the show notes. It says, it's a practical way of creating sanctuary in the middle of very real life.
I love it.
Isn't that so good?
It's beautiful.
So winter is the most hygge time of year. It's candles, nubby woolens, shearling slippers, woven textiles, pastries, blonde wood, sheepskin rugs, lattes with milk foam hearts, and a warm fireplace. And then it goes on to say in this New Yorker article that it can also be, and this is my favorite part, it can also be that schlubby pair of pants you would never wear in public, but secretly treasure.
Mm-hmm.
So last part of this says, hygge can be found in a bakery, and in the dry heat of a sauna in the winter, surrounded by your naked neighbors. It's wholesome and nourishing like porridge. So here is my question for you.
Yeah.
Do you have anything built in or consciously designed in your home to add that feeling of hygge to your radical hospitality?
I'm very geared towards, more and more, I'm geared towards not how does something look, but how does it feel? So I find myself, even as we head into the Christmas season, we've really reshaped a lot of how we do Christmas and all of these things. But rather than look at it from like, okay, what are we going to do at Christmas, or what are we going to get, or all of those things, I'm asking the question, how do we want Christmas to feel? And so I think just for, for myself and for the people that live in this home with me, I'm very interested in the idea of coziness, and I can hunker down like a boss. I'm like you. I don't really love the idea of winter. We have really harsh winters here. We've already had a lot of snow this winter alone, and I don't love that, but it's a great excuse to make some soup and light a candle and, put those easy pants on. That's just kind of the way that I sort of operate. And I'm drawn to this idea of decorating kind of for the seasons. So there's a book that just recently came out called The Cozy Minimalist. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but you should look it up. It's fantastic. And I read through that book and I really enjoyed it. But it's this idea of, we don't have to have a lot of stuff or a lot of like, okay, now it's fall, so everything needs to have a pumpkin on it or a leaf. And then in winter, we shift to snowmen, rather than getting away from this idea of kind of branding our holidays in that way, but just being more interested and focused on how do we want that to feel. So yes, we have cozy blankets around, and we have some just really simple, really kind of pulled from nature decorations here and there. I like to always have a candle lit. And I was just explaining to my 10-year-old son the importance of having that candle smell like the season, because he was trying to be a maniac and get me to light like a fresh garden tomato candle in November. And that just does not work, obviously.
What a maniac.
I know. So I had to really try to work hard to explain to him why. But, I like the scent to match the season. I like the food to kind of match the season. I like to make cozy food like oatmeal for the mornings, or, we've had a ton of soup lately. I'm not a coffee drinker, but my husband is, and most of our neighbors who hang out with us are. And so we just have coffee available. We have an old janky coffee pot. Like, we don't have any kind of fancy anything, but just to have that stuff on hand and available, and, baked goods never hurt. So yeah, I think coziness is something that everybody deserves. And I think it might look a little bit different to different people, but I think cozy means familiarity. I have a very adventurous palate, but when we're having company over, I try to kind of tone it down and make food that is going to be familiar and comfortable. And I think all of that kind of plays in.
Yeah. And at our house, I've been focused on blankets out of the closet, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm adding more blankets to couches and around the
Yes.
house so that they're just everywhere. And then light. One of my friends is an interior designer, and we recently did some remodeling on our house, and she said, put all your lights on dimmers. And I was like, kind of like, okay, that's super fancy, Brie. But I put all the lights on dimmers, and guess what? Ugh.
You love it.
I just bring the lights down,
Yeah.
turn the music on. And so you really can set like a mood
yeah.
at night. And that's been our favorite thing, is to lay in a dimly lit room, everybody kind of on the couch and on the floor and on beanbags, and listen to music and, before we go to bed. And it's been amazing.
Yeah, music is huge. That's a great point. I was traveling back in May, and I'm a huge thrift store fanatic. So most of what we buy and most of what we even wear comes sort of secondhand. But I found this, can't think of the name right now, but one of those like really three-dimensional looking, like a Star of Bethlehem.
Yeah.
And it has little holes punched in it, and it's, it's connected to a cord. And I just strung it up in the dining room, and I get so much pleasure every evening by just plugging in that little light. And my husband recently was even like, yeah, you really love that thing, don't you? And I just do. There's something about the shadows that it casts on the room, and it's just warm and glowy. And so I'm interested in finding ways to create that kind of casual, cozy vibe that also are just very inexpensive.
Yes. And honestly, more strands of white lights for everybody.
Yes.
Just hang them all
Yes.
over,
Yep.
set the mood, bring the cozy.
Amen.
Now, you also said something that I almost like started crying, because I had forgotten in a way that we had done this. So you said you go with the intention of, how do we want people to feel in our house? And I mentioned that we recently did some remodeling, and because we've done a lot on our own, this has been like an epic, like 18-month situation. But when our house was down to the studs and we were just getting ready to put the drywall up, I had in our entryway all these studs, and that there was this piece of me that was panicking just a little bit to cover up the studs, and I didn't know why. And then, I said to my kids, we all got Sharpie markers, and I said, how do we want people to feel in our house? And let's write that on the bones of our house.
Yeah.
So underneath that drywall and covering all these 2x4s, we all just took off and we started writing how we want people to feel. This is where
I love it.
choking up, because we want people to walk through our doors and feel love. And then we just started to write even more, because we just didn't want to, it was like a blank canvas and all the things that we loved.
Know.
And so that's hidden beneath the drywall. But I like to say that, or feel like it's in the bones of our home. Yeah. So, and it's something I just hadn't thought of for a while until you said, how do we want people to feel in our house?
When I was going through a really difficult parenting season, and this would have been, 4 or 5 years ago, I was having one of those really vulnerable mom guilt / you name it. It was bad. And I had been working on some kind of other kind of crafty project, and I had these vinyl sticky letters that I bought at a hardware store. And I slapped them on the wall in our living room. We have a really open floor plan, but a really pretty small house. When you're on the main level, you can just see everything when you're here. And so I stuck them on the wall of our living room, feel safe and feel loved. And my thought was I will leave them here for the next month or so to get me through this time, because I needed to know with my child that it was really, really hard. He needs to go to bed every night knowing that he's safe and knowing that he's loved. And that is it. That is all that matters. Nothing else matters but that. And so that was my way. It was like a reminder to me, more than he couldn't even read at that point. He was so little. But the reminder to me that if my kids feel safe and feel loved, then I'm doing okay and I can go to bed in peace. And so here we are 5 years later, and I'm looking at those words right now, still on my living room wall. The S is starting to peel off and it has lost its sticky power. And I keep thinking I need to just super glue it on there. I don't ever want to bring those words off of my wall. And so I thought it was just a really kind of temporary thing. But that's the feeling that I want to create for every person that walks into our home, even on the days that we might be frazzled or we might be kind of irritable or we might not have the time or whatever the case may be. The goal is for people to feel safe and feel loved. And that's it. That's the only thing that matters.
And sometimes the biggest piece of battle or getting to that goal or whatever it is we're trying to create in our homes is setting the intention.
Right.
Yep. And somehow the world conspires around us to help us make that true.
Right. Yeah. We can take the pressure off of ourselves by, setting that intention for us. I love this conversation of coziness. I think back to a handful of years ago, the first time, and I wrote about this in my first book, Falling Free, but it was the first time we ever invited strangers into our home. We did not know these people at all. And for whatever reason, the words popped out of my mouth, do you want to come over for dinner tonight? And it was in
and
November.
Then you're like, shoot, did I say that?
Totally. But I remember later that night, it was a Sunday and it was November. It was getting dark really early. It was just kind of the season that we're in now, and hoping that they might bail out because I wanted to bail out, but we didn't even have each other's phone numbers. There was just it was nutso. And I remember when it got closer and closer to the time that they were supposed to come over, I was wearing my schlubby yoga pants, doing the Sunday nap sort of thing that afternoon. And I thought, I just, I don't want to do this. What was I thinking? And now I've got to go get dressed. And all of a sudden I realized, what if I just stayed in these crappy yoga pants? Would that be the end of the world?
It's always the best choice, actually.
It's the best choice. And I think sometimes we have these ideas, people have this certain expectation, but wouldn't we all just rather the yoga pants be the default? So I think sometimes we have to just go first. We have to be the first one to kind of put ourselves out there and go out on a limb and just be normal, just be our normal selves. And I just don't know very many people that would have a problem with that. I think the hope is that when we start to do these things, just present ourselves in our most normal, ordinary state, it gives everybody else permission to do the same. And then we're all better off because we're in our yoga pants. And that's really the goal.
Yes. Then you can eat as much as you want at that dinner and you won't even notice. Right. Your pants won't even tell you. I love that. Give everybody permission. And sometimes you just need to go first to do that.
Yeah.
You made me remember also a quote that came from, it was just a couple episodes ago. Erin and I did an All the Things episode, and she talked about another book she loved. You can tell that my friend Erin, my Today's Mama sidekick, she reads more than I do. She'd read a book by Jenny Rosenstock, and it's a cookbook.
Yep.
And one of the quotes she pulled out of that was, you just make sure that when those girls walk in that door every day, they never doubt that home is the most comforting place for them to be.
Oh, I love it. And I love that book.
Yes.
I'll second that. That's beautiful.
Yeah. It's in the intention of all the things we do. And that feeling can be in yoga pants as much as it can be in pants that have buttons.
Or maybe even more, I would
More.
argue. Maybe even more. I think there's so much power in eating together, no matter what it is. And especially when it's like weird. I think of some of the most memorable meals I've had or that we've shared with people who we love. And it's usually those really weird, like, hey, I have this, and it's like half a meal. Do you have anything that might make it more of a meal? And it's never stuff that matches. And it's not stuff that, would make it into a magazine spread or Pinterest or whatever. That's what we remember, because it's like, here's my 2 loaves of bread and here are your 2 loaves of bread, and somehow we make it work. I think we've got to fight to get back to that.
You're listening to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher. We'll be back right after this.
Looking for holiday gift ideas? I got you. I've talked about buying gift certificates on Christmas Eve. Yep, like after midnight. Chatbooks had me covered. I just hit print, and the next day I showed up like a champion. This year, I'm working in advance. Photo books for all my favorite peeps. They are the gifts that keep on giving. It's like giving happy. Each of my kids will get a photo book this year. Grandparents will get photo books. You'll get a photo book. Photo books for everyone. They're beautiful, they're personal, and the possibilities are endless. Chapbooks are printed with archival paper, premium quality inks, and durable, perfect binding. Starting at just $10 for a 30-page book, making a photo book with chapbooks is as easy on your wallet as it is to make. Happy gifting.
And now back to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher.
Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about adoption, because you've said you have 4 funny children who came to you across oceans and rivers, which I think is the most beautiful way of setting the stage for that story. So tell us a little bit about how your family came to be.
My husband and I had been married for, I'm not good at math and I don't know. We'd been married for a while. A lot of the people around us had sort of, they got married and then they started their families pretty quickly. And that wasn't quite our story. We had waited a little while. We lived out in Washington, D.C. We both had political jobs and we did that thing. And so when we moved back to Indiana from our time in D.C., suddenly I was ready to start our family. And I was slower to get to that point, is what I'm trying to say. I was not the woman who was like dying to be a mom until the day that I was. And so we were surprised when we were handed the gift of infertility. This was not something we had planned for ourselves. And, it kind of knocked the control out from under us in a lot of ways. And it was, it was sad for a while. And it was frustrating and hard and all of those things. But I think, some of this is just personality. And so we kind of just shifted gears like, okay, we tried some things. We saw doctors and that kind of thing. But we just knew that we wanted a family. And it started to become clear to us that our family was going to come through adoption. And so we did then adopt our first kiddo. That it's sort of hard because we adopted out of birth order. So he's not our oldest, but our first adoption was my son, Calvin, who was born in South Korea. And he came home when he was 4 months old. So tiny baby. And then a little less than a year later, Ruby was born, and she was born locally. We have an open adoption with her birth mom. And then we brought Silas home from South Korea. He was 18 months old at the time, which I see 18-month-olds now and I'm like, oh, they're tiny babies. They're practically infants. But at the time, compared to a newborn and a very young infant, I mean, this 18-month-old kid shows up and I'm like, he's grown. He's basically grown. He's walking and he's trying to talk and he's got a lot of feelings and emotions.
He has a beard and he's ready to get his driver's
right.
license.
Like, I was just like, he's practically in college. So that was a big adjustment for us. And then after we moved to Goshen 6 years ago, we ended up adopting our oldest son, Robert. He was 19 years old at the time and in jail and about to be sent off to prison. So that was like a very big surprise for our family and a literal big surprise because he's huge. He's very tall. And so he had been born and spent most of his childhood in the Chicago area. So not super far from here. But yeah, they all have just unique stories and, they made their way to us in very special and different ways.
So what's super interesting in there's so much interesting, but the birth order thing.
Yeah.
So how has that actually played out over the years? Did your kids settle into different roles or is it just kind of a jumble? What do you notice?
Yeah, I mean, the first three were adopted in birth order, and they're all very close in age. So Ruby and Calvin were just 16 months apart. I mean, they've been kind of like the Bobbsey twins growing up.
Gotcha.
And then Silas was pretty close in age to Ruby. He was just, he came home to us with a lot of grief. And I think in part because he was a little bit older. I mean, there are a lot of things that play into this. And it was also right around the time that we started to know that we were going to be selling our farm. And, we knew that our life was about to change in a lot of ways. So it was a lot of transition. It was a really hard time just for all of us, especially for him. But then when Robert came into the scene, he was so much older. And, when he was released from prison, he lived with us for about a year and he's lived with us a few times now and then, but he is so much older. He's way out of birth order, but he's also more of like the fun uncle to the little kids. It just played out differently. So being his mom, when he came home to live in our home and he was 20 years old and had twin sons of his own. I mean, it's chaos. It's nutty. I couldn't have planned any of this. I could never have known to want this. But here we are. I mean, it's all very surprising. And we've had to adjust and adapt along the way. But like the birth order thing hasn't been difficult because I think he's just so much older.
Now, adoption has always seemed so magical to me because you said this is something you never knew you could dream up or the life that you could have ever even wanted. But it can also be really hard. And you've kind of alluded to that. And you've adopted some kids who've had some trauma. So what does that really look like?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like, and even though, I mean, all of our kids were adopted and we see, and I think, obviously parents with biological kids probably run into the same thing. You have to parent different kids in different ways. There's not a general template that works in every situation with every kiddo. So we're trying to navigate that. And, at the same time, they're all getting older and all of this stuff kind of plays in. But I would say one of the biggest things that it means for my family is that we always have somebody in therapy, always. And right now there are a few of us who we place a high value on talking to people who can help us seek healing. And that's the language we use, is that it takes a lot of courage and a lot of bravery to work towards healing and to seek health. And I mean, I think that goes for everybody, whether we're adopted or not. But I think especially as we navigate just some of the loss that lingers with adoption and some of the unanswered questions and some of the, I mean, we have kids who feel that kind of sense of, like an instability, or it can create these feelings of abandonment and loss and, sadness that can linger or that can pop up out of nowhere. Having people in place to help us talk through that and work through that and process that and to destigmatize therapy or counseling or even medication in some cases. My husband and I work hard in those areas to just really normalize it and to seek help ourselves when we need it, to kind of set that example.
I love what you've said when you filled out our little pre-interview form, and it was what was the wish that you might have for your children? And you said, I hope they grow to really believe that God makes real, enduring families in a number of ways, and that they are beloved and that they belong.
Yeah. Oh, that's going to make me cry.
Dude, my goal in life is to be Oprah that makes everybody cry on the couch.
Right.
But I think it was said so beautifully. That kind of puts a bow on everything you just talked about, on healing and that you come together in lots of different ways. But at the end of the day, we do this work to heal, but the biggest thing that matters is that they are beloved and that they belong.
Yeah, the belonging thing it's so important, and it's so kind of tricky, especially as they get older. And I think most adoptive moms, my kids, I'm white and I don't have any white kids. So there's that. But I don't think.
And what kind of experiences have you had in that role?
Well, I mean, all over the map. That's what I'm kind of trying to articulate, is that it's getting harder in some ways because the kids are getting older and they're just more aware. Like, I don't look at my kids as like, oh, there's my Asian son, or there's my African American daughter, or, they're just mine, and I'm theirs. And, we're connected, and we're forever, and we're obsessed with each other. But when I can take just one step outside of that, I realize we attract a lot of attention wherever we go. And my kids are starting to run into just the very normal part of middle school kind of stuff, where Ruby, who's biracial, and Calvin, who is Korean, I mean, they're getting all those comments about like, well, she can't be your sister, or that can't be your mom, or you don't look anything alike, or, all of these things. And it's work. It's work to foster that belonging, and to kind of push back against the outside narrative that families should look alike, or whatever the case may be.
And I think there's a lot of things that we say to each other that come across harsh, and that sometimes are harsh. And then I think as families, the outside looking in, we can do things that we think maybe are well-meaning, but end up just adding pressure on families that have mixed
Right.
race from just all over. So I was talking to a mom in my neighborhood who has adopted 2 African-American kids who are just the cutest things in the world. And everywhere they go, though, everybody notices, oh, you have 2 Black kids, right?
Right.
And then they give positive attention to it, like, oh, they are so cute.
Right.
And her hair is so cute. And almost go that extra mile of being like, it's so cute that then those kids feel watched all the time. So
Yes.
On one hand, that's well-intentioned, right?
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, we're almost just pointing out difference in a different way. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? It's something that she's struggling with her kids.
Yeah, kids can be made hyper visible. Like, it makes them hyper aware of the ways that they're different. And that's really hard, especially for a middle schooler, is what I'm finding. Middle schoolers they want to blend in. And, we live in a really diverse community. Our kids go to a very diverse school, but it's mostly Latino kids. So there are very few Asian kids in particular. And so even in this huge, diverse school system, they still stand out just because of the way they look. I think that's such a good point that you made about your friend. I think we have to really be willing and be vulnerable enough to inspect our own motives when we are the ones doing those things. And I am raising my hand. Like, I have done that stuff before, where you realize like, oh, something's different. And so I'm going to make things better by like swooning all over it, or by calling attention to it. What we have to be able to recognize is that there's still that thing in us that's embedded way, way, way under our good intentions, that acknowledges that thing as distinctly, fundamentally different from us. And I think that can be the root of a lot of other issues that come out of, just in some very small and very quiet and very seemingly innocent ways, that we do place different value on different races. And we might not even necessarily think that. We might not be ready to admit that, but I think there's just work to be done. And I know this because I have had to do that work within myself as the mom of kids of different races, especially as the mom of a 24-year-old African-American man who has a really hard past, and, who has, I've already mentioned, he's been to jail, he's been to prison. I've had to really confront my truest heart of, how I have been taught to see different people. And it's hard work, and it's painful, and it's uncomfortable, but it's really important.
I love what you said about letting them blend in, and not in a way that I say we all need to blend in, but when we make people feel hypervisible in that way. I think even maybe another way to say this is that we can let them feel like they belong, let people blend in, let everybody be a very normal part of our experience, right?
Right. Yeah, that we don't have to place that extra attention on them. I mean, we can just, Ruby gets the same comments about her hair, and I know that these are very well-meaning things, but when you put yourself in the position of that child who, especially if they're existing in a world that is just very white everywhere they go, this is what they hear everywhere they go. Another thing that we've run into is people saying about my boys who are both Asian, are they real brothers? And it makes me crazy, because in some ways that's hard stuff that my family is always working through, is that belonging and that togetherness. I mean, these are very hard won fights that we're up against. So to have people on the outside of our family suggesting that they are not real brothers reinforces things that we are just working so hard against ourselves. It makes me a little prickly. My impulse is like, yes, they are real brothers. But you have to think of these kiddos who are always getting this message, and it might be innocent enough, but when you hear those things consistently all the time, it's a constant reminder that this is not, air quotes, normal, and that we don't blend in, and that this is not real. When everything that we're trying to do in my family is like, this is real. It's different, but it's real.
There's a lot of well-meaning, almost people trying to get to know you in some circumstances, right? So what advice or maybe new conversation starters are there for people who can kind of replace their defaults? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say for the most part, I would not let the adoption thing, unless maybe if you yourself are an adoptive family or you yourself were adopted, outside of those examples, I would say the adoption doesn't need to be the conversation starter at all. I mean, I'm interested in people getting to know us because we're cool people and, we're pretty fun and casual. But to get to know us as people, as humans, as neighbors, as whatever the case may be. And then once that friendship is formed or that relationship is kind of, it's got some legs beneath it, then to listen, to ask questions, maybe if they're not too intrusive. But I think it's personal stuff. These are the stories of my kids, and I'm really protective of that. It's not necessarily up to public consumption or public discussion. But, once we're friends with somebody, once there's some trust there, that can be a bit of a different story. And I'll also say, especially some of my kids in particular really like to talk about their birth culture, or, they're comfortable talking about their adoption story, but they need to have the power. It needs to kind of happen on their terms. Otherwise, it's not quite fair. But having said all of that, especially when we were first adopting, when we were kind of on that journey, I mean, I was like a stalker. If I saw what I thought to be an adoptive family, out in public, I had so many questions and I was so drawn to them. So I understand those impulses. I just think we have to do a better job of kind of putting ourselves in the shoes of that other person.
You don't have to lead with adoption, lead with getting to know that person.
I mean, respond to me as though you have every reason to believe that my kids were biologically born to me. It doesn't mean that you can't acknowledge that they're my kids or acknowledge that I'm their mom, or, we can't talk about family stuff, but maybe approach it from the view or the lens of, I'm their mom and they're my kids. Like, let it start there rather than, oh, wow, they were adopted, obviously, and now I'm really curious.
Yeah, I love that. Now, you gave a movie recommendation for a movie called The Hate You Give, and I saw a trailer for this. I don't think it's received nearly enough attention. It's still on my list of movies to see, along with my pile of books I still need to read. But why is this movie at the top of your list?
It's just so important. Here's the honest truth, is that I have not yet seen the movie. So I did recommend a movie that I haven't seen yet because it's hard to find. It was here for a minute and then it was gone because not enough people saw it.
Yes.
But the book, we'll just make a slight turn and turn this into a book recommendation. The book, The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, is so important. And it was so meaningful to me as the mom of, in particular, as Robert's mom, the mom of an African-American son I mean, it confronts a lot of the things that we've talked about what it means to really investigate and inspect our deepest beliefs, I guess, that are most deeply buried within us about what makes people different and what people deserve and how much dignity people deserve and all of those things. I mean, I think it's classified as like young adult fiction, but it's a powerful, powerful book.
Okay, so that's adding to your reading and gifting list. And if you can find The Hate U Give where you live, make sure you go see it over the holiday break, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Now, before we go, because I know we're deep in this one. So before we go, I just want to read back to you a little piece of your book, The Ministry of Ordinary Places, that Erin, who I keep mentioning from the beginning of the show, she sent this to me. And I want to get your parting thoughts on this message.
Sure.
So the mission humbly asks that we devote ourselves to the overlooked spiritual practice of paying attention to wherever God has placed us. That's where we begin. And though it's not terribly complicated, it will ask more of us than we ever imagined. So what do we need to start noticing around us wherever we are right now?
I started to just, in the most simple and basic way, I started really becoming intentional about paying attention to my neighborhood. And what I mean by that is like taking walks and noticing the sky and watching the trees. And anybody who follows me on Instagram, I'm really active on Instagram. I'm on there almost every day. I started kind of a routine or a rhythm in my own life where I would walk my kids to school in the morning, and it's 2 blocks away. You know, they attend the Title I public school at the end of our street. So it wasn't a long walk, but it was kind of like an all-weather walk, like rain or shine or snow. We were walking to school, and then on that 2-block walk back home, I challenged myself to find something beautiful right here in a neighborhood that a lot of people would not naturally see as very beautiful. And so I just set out to kind of take a picture every morning. I didn't have any big intention or deeper meaning behind that. But what I didn't realize was that it was becoming this really important practice. And the more I did this, the more I did find my place as beautiful, the more I loved the people around me. I mean, it had this sort of infectious quality to it. And as we really try to start listening and looking and really being aware of what's around us, a lot of these big problems that we feel swirling in the atmosphere that just feel way too big for us to even touch or impact in any way, I started to see them visible right down here at street level. And so as we notice kind of pain or fracture or heartbreak happening around us, as we notice injustice, or, you know, we could go on and on and on, you know, that's our entry point into really living intentionally and really loving and being loved by the people around us. And then this hope is, and the belief that I very much cling to, is making the world better for one person makes the world better. So as we engage with these neighbors of ours, and as we seek their help, and as we're able to kind of walk with them through whatever they've got going on, that actually does make the world a better and brighter place. And so I'm interested in this idea of what if we all just started paying attention to what was happening around us and putting our efforts and our focus and our time and attention there.
And that feels so doable. Making the world better for one person makes the world better.
Yeah.
I can do a little bit of that every day, every week, right? Wherever I can. And so much of what we hear in the news and what we see around us that discourages us so much is overwhelming and feels untouchable. But that, making the world better for one person makes the world better.
Yeah.
Okay, Shannan, I can't get enough of you. Like, your Instagram account is fabulous. Your website, like, I had to cut like half the quotes I wanted to throw at you. It's just so much good stuff. So if people want to follow you online, which they should, where should they go?
You know, Instagram and Twitter are 2 places that I spend time in every day. And in both places, I am at Shannan Writes, and it's Shannan with an A at the end. And then I'm also active on Facebook, and I blog at shannanmartinwrites.com. I'm very easy to find. So yes, I would love to connect with people in one of those places.
Now, you also have something coming up.
It's called 12 Ways of Christmas.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. You have the 12 Ways of Christmas coming up. Tell us about that.
That's going to be something that I'll start talking about, and kind of, it's totally free, but you've got to kind of sign up for it. It's very easy, but I'll start talking about that here soon. It's a way of looking at Christmas, kind of hinting back to what we talked about in the beginning of this conversation. What do we want our Christmas to feel like? rather than what do we want to do at Christmas. So it's kind of a short but meaningful shift in how we see the holiday, how we can kind of reflect on it and really live the Christmas season in a way that feels a little more meaningful and intentional.
Oh, I love it. And they can just find that at shannanwrites.com. Is that the best place?
Yep. And I'll be talking about it quite a bit on Instagram as well. So it's kind of one of those like, stay tuned and you'll be seeing it. There will be opportunities to get that right in your inbox.
Thank you so much for being here today. And I hope we get to meet in real life in our schlubby yoga pants.
Oh, let's do it.
And that we can Hygge together. All right. We will talk again soon.
Sounds good.
I've got your friendly reminder to look down at the app you're listening on and give us all the stars and likes and love you can possibly muster. Be sure to subscribe on whatever app you're listening on. And remember, you can also subscribe via email at todaysmama.com/podcast. You can also access each episode's show notes at todaysmama.com/podcast. Each episode is numbered and titled with the guest name. Super easy. Catch you next time.
You've been listening to the Today's Mama podcast with Rachel Hersher. To find out more, go to todaysmama.com. That's today's, MAMA.com. Today's Mama, connecting moms and families with the best of today.